Thank you so much for the kind introduction and the opportunity to present some of my research to you and introduce myself a bit to you all. I chose the title for this presentation as the actual official name of how my professorship is called, Integrated System Modeling for Sustainability Transitions. And when I talk to people about, I have this new position, told them the title, oh yeah, that's a long title, that's quite general. But the more I think about it, it actually really fits what I'm doing and what I'm understanding behind these words. That is my goal to convey to you today. It might be the case that I will be focusing on the word modeling, on the foundations of modeling more, and the intention of that is really to show you how we might be able to collaborate in the future when you might have a certain case or a specific system. So you are very warmly invited to think about how these methods could apply to your case, and I'm always looking forward to collaborations. But before we get into the heart of the matter, let's first remind ourselves what is actually the challenge. And on a big picture, I think the challenge of the 21st century is prospering within planetary boundaries, reducing our impact on the Earth system, staying below an ecological ceiling. But on the other hand, we also don't want to have no impact, because we want basic human needs fulfilled and reach ideally all sustainable development goals on a pathway safely away from catastrophic tipping elements. The crucial question is, of course, how to enter such a safe and just space. And I think what is clear from many observations, many literatures, and many studies is that we need urgent and large-scale collective action to do that. So how can we organize that, or what's the problem? I think it's not because of lack of knowledge. I think we know that we have a problem. And I would also argue that we know to a great deal what we should do. And even left aside that there might be technological innovations left to discover, there would always be the option to reduce our impact, using less energy, using less resources. So this is you might call it a naive action, but it is there. So the question, if we have the information and we know what we could do, why is it not happening? So this very simplistic model of our collective decision-making process is obviously maybe too simplistic. So what's going on in this collective decision-making? And therefore, I think it's good to go to the foundations and reshape the way we do human environment modeling. That's going to be the first part of my talk. And in a nutshell, it's on offer to look at sustainability transitions as a challenge for our joint collective intelligence. In the second part, I want to illustrate how this particular type of human environment modeling is able to look at critical leverage points for sustainability transitions. And I want to show you how from this system, from this modeling framework, we can really see emergent social tipping points, something that I discovered not too long ago and I'm a bit excited about. So let's start with reshaping human environment modeling. To do that, it's good to remind ourselves, or to list what are actually the challenges for the collective action problem. For one, it's that we have to work with very large collectives, many actors. So there are no outside authorities that could enforce or change the system such that cooperation is an attractive option. And also thinking of Elinor Ostrom and her work, bottom-up reciprocity is obviously not working in large collectives. It's the complexity of human behavior that challenges collective action, conceptualized as an adaptive cognition that we employ. Neither we are fully rational as assumed in many models, but also not too simplistic as in other models. So it's really something in between. We are diverse in our abilities and our preferences, and that needs to be taken into account, and is surely not comes with many complications. And also we have to deal with multiple objectives. A prime example are the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's not clear to whether we can fulfill all of them, and there, I'm sure, have heard about synergies and trade-offs between those. And the fact that we have changing dynamic environments is another challenge of collective action that hasn't been looked at that systematically. First of all, that consequences are delayed. What we do today has impacts long in the future, and as we all know, this is not giving us good incentives to act, right? Then if we might argue, okay, the reducing our impact is not a viable option. We don't like to do that. What we could do comes with a huge search space. Just the dimensionality of what we could do is very large, and indications whether we're on the right track are sparse. This is the terminology, sparse rewards, what I mean by that. And of course, uncertainty in the system also obviously complicates, but also might, I mean, all of these things, there might be hidden mechanisms behind that are beneficial for cooperation. And the last part I want to emphasize is that we need to look at the dynamics of collective action, because dynamical concepts are behind stability and resilience. To assess these, we need a dynamic understanding of collective action, but also critical transitions, social tipping points, or just in general transient behavior are all elements of a dynamical conceptualization. And to address these challenges, as you might have guessed, I believe mathematical models are key, are very essential. And there are many reasons, I would say, for theory building, getting really a good understanding of how things interact. Also formal, or in one understanding of the term, quantitative understanding. Would also say it's not necessarily about prediction with these models, but also about envisioning possible futures, future making, and also, of course, to run in silico experiments for policy interventions. And so to take these challenges in and compile a list of possible, or of the desiderata we want such a modeling framework or theory to have, it should be a dynamic account of collective behavior emerging from a cognitive principled account of agency in changing environment, and ideally in a transparent and understandable way. Okay, so this is what we like to have. Let's look at the literature. Let's look at other possible modeling strategies, modeling tools out there to answer how we could compile something like that. And this is really just one way of looking at the modeling landscape, but I think it's safe to say you could think on the one hand on equation-based models, dynamical systems, system dynamics, equilibrium-based models, often in economics, and if we are in a multi-agent version, it's most of the time classical game theory. And as a third element in that spectrum, agent-based models. And really re-emphasizing there are a lot of variations in between those, but maybe just to have these three classes of models. And as you might have guessed, none of those really is able to perform well on all of our desiderata. I would argue equation-based models are not as straightforward to look at the agency, like how is human behavior conceptualized there. And most of the time we have to work with aggregate collectives. And this is not so attractive if we want to look at heterogeneity and inequality in the models. Equilibrium-based models, as the name suggests, they are static. They don't have a dynamic account on their foundations. And also, a lot of them have a conceptualization of what I either perfect rationality or could even say hyper rationality. Words are very important, but don't. I'm always open to discussion also on terminology. And by the way, if you have any questions also during the talk, feel free to interrupt me, and we can discuss everything that very interesting to do. Okay. Anyway, the last part, agent-based models, I would say they fall short because some of them can be quite hard to understand, are limited in the transparency of what is going on. They can become quite complex very easily. And I would argue you are very free to model how agent behavior is modeled in agent-based models. And this makes it sometimes hard really to aggregate knowledge between different models. So it's not maybe ideal to build up knowledge from a mathematical point of view. And what I mean here with behavioral agency is, so you could specify how humans or actors in general behave in a model. But when your environment changes, like when you run a policy intervention, this doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior in this new state of the environment is reasonable or adequate. So if you specify a model on the level of behavior, it is not able to change to changing conditions. All right, so the question for us is now, how can we integrate these perspectives ideally into one coherent framework? And what I'm proposing, what I want to introduce you to is I'm calling collective reinforcement learning dynamics, which is an integrative perspective on human environment interactions. It so luckily we don't have to start from scratch. We can build upon many works from a diverse set of disciplines, the theory of learning in games and economics, machine learning from computer science, statistical mechanics approaches to collective learning from physics, and also very related to evolutionary game theory from theoretical biology. Here it's important to keep in mind that all of those foci have different, all of those fields have different foci. So it's not like that everything contributes to our goal of modeling the collective dynamics emerging from multi-agent reinforcement learning, but they all have valuable perspectives to offer. Okay, so now this term multi-agent reinforcement learning appeared. What is multi-agent reinforcement learning? So this is, I would argue, also a quite interdisciplinary field, but this term you would find these days under the umbrella of artificial intelligence. But for us, we take it as a mathematical framework. And in that mathematical framework, we have more than one agent and an environment. And now each agent can choose an action, and the joint action exerts onto the environment. And as a result, the environment may or may not change its state. And the agents can observe parts of the environment and also get a signal of how well they are doing on that's called the rewards. Now, the reinforcement learning loops works that this process works iteratively. So we have this interaction phase with the environment where the agents assess their current temporal difference, or also called reward prediction error. And this element tells the agents how to adapt, how they should change their behavior in the future. And this you could think of is what they do in the adaptation phase. And so since this is really a common framework in multi-agent artificial intelligence framework, conceptually, it's a way of looking at the sustainability challenge as a challenge for our collective intelligence. Can we solve it, or can't we? Or it is even possibly fruitful to ask, is it actually that what we want, or are short-term interests overweighting? And so then it wouldn't be unintelligent, but not satisfying. Okay, now few more details on that framework. So on the environment side, we work with so-called stochastic games or Markov games. And they are quite general framework to express all kinds of different dynamics in the environment. I recently learned there is something called state transition models in social ecological research. And this is very similar. They extend to normal form games known in theory and very established in multi-agent environment, multi-agent artificial intelligence. Now, looking at the agents, and here agents, as you can guess with the term multi-agent reinforcement learning, will employ reinforcement learning. And this is, of course, an algorithm in artificial intelligence research, but it is also a model of how our brain works with connections to neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics. And here I just brought you this very famous figure that shows that the dopamine activity bears striking resemblance to the temporal difference error, this mathematical object I prescribed. So here I see reinforcement learning really as a good candidate for a cognitively principled account to human agency. And luckily, it's also already formalized, mathematically formalized. So I'm trying really to keep the equations to a minimum, but they are all there, and mathematical theory that can be built upon. So this is also nice because we want a quantitative mathematical framework. The problem is that if you go to traditional reinforcement learning algorithms, they are very stochastic, very noisy, sometimes, again, hard to explain, very sample inefficient, which means the agents need a long time learning. And therefore, also all of these reasons make it computationally quite intense. So if you would just do traditional reinforcement learning algorithms, you would need a very big cluster and compute resources. And all of these things make sense from an engineering perspective. But from a modeling perspective, there might be another solution. And this is presented here, the only equation I promise I will show, by a mean field approximation of this process. And the key idea of how this learning works. So we have a joint strategy, which is just the probability of each agent in each state, which action will it choose in the simplest case. And this is updated according to the last probability times the exponent of the strategy average temporal difference error multiplied by the learning rate and properly normalized, such that we have a probability distribution here on the left side again. So just to give you a brief idea of what is behind the figures I want to show in a couple of slides. And now with this mean field approximation, tools from complex system science, emergent collective behavior open up relatively naturally, looking at the dynamic regimes, phase space and multistability, critical transitions, and also hysteresis. And together with the reinforcement learning and the stochastic games for changing environments, we gain a transparent, dynamic account on collective behavior emerging from cognitive agency in changing environment, and that in a transparent, understandable way, and also a computationally light compared to maybe other traditional reinforcement learning approaches. Are there any questions so far on this part? This doesn't seem to be the case. So let's get a bit more practical, not too practical, but a bit more practical, and look at how can we use this to identify critical leverage points for sustainability transitions. And this is something I think many of you have seen already, others not. It's not too important. I will show it to you. It's a very, very established model of a collective action problem, a public goods game, and here in this 2 version, a prisoner's dilemma. So let's imagine that we are agent 2. Each of us is agent 2, and we have an agent, another agent 1 that is playing with us. And let's imagine agent 1 would cooperate. So we can both either cooperate with each other or defect. So in that case, if agent 1 would cooperate, we would be better off defecting. We would gain 3 utilities, 3 rewards instead of 1. So this would be better for us. If agent 1 would defect, then we would also be better off defecting because 0 is better than -2. Okay. Since it doesn't matter what agent 2 is doing, agent 1 is doing, we should defect. But the game is symmetric. It's identical from the perspective of agent 1. So agent 1 would also defect, and both we would end up defecting. Now, the dilemma in that situation is that we both could gain more reward, would be better off, would be more happy if we were both cooperating. And now, if we're looking at that from the learning perspective, here in such a phase-based plot, here on the x-axis, you see the probability of agent 1 cooperating, and on the y-axis, the probability of agent 2 cooperating. Then you see from all possible starting points, all configurations, how we could behave, all lead to this mutual defection point. So the classic game theory, the equilibrium analysis, and the learning, they fit very well together. Now, what happens if we imagine we repeat this game over and over? And another way to look at it is that we repeat it. You always have to repeat it when you learn, but now you remember, or we remember what we did in the last round. So in other words, this means I'm not just a simple either cooperating or defecting. I look at what did we do last round. So maybe you defected, I cooperated, or the other way around. And based on that, I will choose to cooperate or defect. And in this case, we see, first of all, that here in the blue trajectory, we can learn to cooperate. And this is also perfectly in line with equilibrium game theory, because we are changing the game. And if we care enough for the future, then we have cooperation as a stable solution. But interestingly, we also see very complex transient dynamics that we observe also in nature, in the real world. And this can be captured here with a learning approach. And this is not so easy, or not at all able to express from an equilibrium perspective. All right, so we see complex dynamic regimes. But is this really the game we are playing, this public goods game, the prisoner's dilemma? And to illustrate why I think that is not the game we are playing, let's look at this graph here, where we see the temperature anomaly on the y-axis over the last 22,000 years. And what we can take away from this is that in only 50 years of human activity, we tipped the 10,000 years of stable Holocene period of the Earth system, where we invented all our cultural inventions from agriculture to the computer into what you could call the Anthropocene, the age of humans. Now, also because of tipping elements in the Earth system and other processes, what we do the next 50 years will determine the next 10,000 years. So you see timescales are very important, ecological timescales in human environment interactions. But in models such as the prisoner's dilemma that just have basically one state, no environment, we are not able to express this element of timescales. And so in these models of collective action, even if they model catastrophic tipping, we didn't find time or a future or environment. So this is why we set out to refine this very established model of the public good by starting from it, as we've just seen. But we associate this condition with a prosperous environment. So here we have this social dilemma conflict, but in fact, we can gain some, you could interpret this as ecosystem services or other types. We get well-being from the environment. But now we said, okay, defection is not only the socially suboptimal decision, it also comes with the risk of collapsing the environment into a degraded state, where here we have the time scale of collapse, and at the degraded state, all agents suffer from a negative impact of collapse, and only after some time they can recover. And this time can be, very far into the future. But we didn't exclude the possibility of recovery in the first place. And now if we look at the learning dynamics, we see a change in the qualitative elements. And here we don't use any form of social reciprocity. So agents are not aware that there are other agents except with their reaction to the environment. They are just reacting to the environment. And as you can see, we now have a bistable regime. This means depending on where we are starting, we either end up cooperating or defecting. And this multi-stability conceptually gives us a relation to, in this case, social ecological resilience, because in a lot of operationalizations of resilience, exactly this space which leads to the cooperative equilibrium or to an equilibrium at all, this space has been operationalized as a measure of resilience. And the idea is this, then when we are starting in this space and get a perturbation, or when we are in the equilibrium and are perturbed, then this space gives us an idea how much of perturbations we can tolerate. And therefore, it's a quite established operationalization of resilience. Very recently, it has also been conceptualized as a measure of collective intelligence, the basin of attraction that leads to the cooperative equilibrium. So in a way, you get here this analogy that the social ecological resilience is equal to collective intelligence. Some food for thought, maybe. And on a, in a way, computational level, having multi-stability also means that the collective of agents is able to store information. Because with two equilibria, it can store one bit of information, and this information is not stored in any individual, but only in the collective. And so this might be a creative idea of maybe conceptualizing norms or institutions, informal societal arrangements based on this idea of collective memory. Now let's zoom in this bundle and look at this bifurcation point here. And if we take the closest blue and red trajectory and look at the trajectory over time, then you see they start almost at the identical point, and then evolve almost identically. So they might even seem to be converged if you have your scale of convergence there. And then only at a certain time, they drift apart drastically. So this is another, important transient phenomenon to consider when we think of sustainability transitions. And we called it here the emergent separation of timescales. We can also look at the social tipping point in this case, so the point between the red and the blue trajectories. And if we plot the time steps it takes the agents to converge to the equilibrium, we see that at this critical point, it's much larger than at other parts. And this is known as critical slowing down. And consequences of this phenomenon of critical slowing down is that, maybe concepts of convergence are less important. We need to emphasize the transient learning dynamics. And on the other hand, they also have, a potential for early warning indicators, and a very established concept from the more natural sciences to detect whether or not we are close to a tipping point. But this suggests that this should also equally apply to social systems, to the social part of the system. Right, so far we looked at the multi-stability inside the system, just changing where the agents start. Now let's take one step out of the system and change like parameters. And a parameter is how much the agents care for the future. So this is from this learning perspective outside a learning perspective. Okay. Anyway, what happens if you change the discount factor, how much agents care for the future? You find another quite abrupt transitions from zero cooperation to full cooperation on a relatively short range. The identical picture, of course, in terms of the rewards, their well-being they get. And you again get this phenomenon of a critical slowing down at the edge or at this social tipping range. And therefore, the same consequences apply also to this other type of critical or abrupt transitions. And a last phenomenon, complex phenomenon we see is hysteresis in the social dynamics. Also, and this is just an example, we could look at other parameters, but for the sake of argument, when agents become more future caring. So the difference in this simulation is that now we start the simulation here at this discount factor of 0.6. So they are care with that amount for the future, and a higher discount factor means they care more for the future. So, and now imagine some intervention. We manage to get people more care for the future, and they start to wander along this line. And then this model projects that at this critical point, they suddenly jump into the cooperative equilibrium. So if you will, our campaign was successful. Now, if we stop the campaign and the caring for the future becomes a bit less, we're not that future-oriented anymore. The interesting thing we see that we stay at this cooperation level if we are not too low in our future caring. So this is, again, another form of collective memory. And as I described, could be a potential for sustainability interventions. All right, all these phenomena can be well explained by looking at the parameter space from an equilibrium perspective of this model. So here we spend it from the collapse impact on the y-axis, like how severe the collapse is, and the caring for the future on the y-axis. And what we can calculate is that when the collapse impact is not too severe or the caring for the future not too high, we are in this famous tragedy of the commons regime, the public goods problem. Regardless of what the other are doing, everyone has an incentive to defect or behave not sustainable. But within this equilibrium analysis, we see that when we cross this blue line, either because the collapse impact becomes more severe or the caring for the future higher, we enter this coordination regime, the bistability. And interestingly, we are also able to enter what we call the comedy of the commons regime, which says, regardless of what others are doing, everyone has an incentive to behave cooperatively or sustainably. And these incentive regimes, they fit very well to the learning dynamics. And so what we can just read from this plot is that caring for the future alone without any form of social reciprocity can turn the tragedy of the commons into a comedy. And this is basically, the line we went through in these dynamic plots. So to relate this a bit more to real world events up for discussion, what does it mean for our model of the collective decision-making process? So on the one hand, this information, how severe the collapse is, I think there we did a lot of reports from the Limits to Growth, IPCC reports and others. We know we have a problem. But we also need this caring factor. And as you might remember, we had this youth movement quite actively, which is maybe nowadays not that present anymore, but still active, that put the future in the center of the message, the Fridays for Future. And this also had a measurable impact on potential voters in Germany who considered the environment as an important problem. If you think about the discount factor and its economic reasoning behind it, it's perfectly rational to associate more caring for the future with a youth movement. Here it says, I'm still 80 years here on this planet. But then, as you all know, of course, we had other crises that shifted the attention to our more present concerns. And now the Corona crisis seems almost over, and we are in the crisis after that. And so the consequences we can all think about is, what can we do to make our collective decision-making more future-oriented? All right. To summarize, I presented you today my version of integrated system modeling for sustainability transitions and introduced you to the reasoning behind collective reinforcement learning dynamics as a transparent, dynamic, and integrating modeling framework to assess the collective behavior which emerges from a cognitive principled account of agency in dynamic environments. I've shown you how emergent social ecological tipping points are present in such a modeling framework, that we can draw robust insights for sustainability transitions by combining dynamics and equilibrium perspectives. And as I said in the beginning, there's much more future work required and wanted, of course. And here I really see a huge potential for collaborations to which I just want to express a warm invitation to all of you to discuss potential ideas. But for now, thank you very much for your attention.